And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving, and Ron can attest to that.
You cannot. It's sad
in,
to see you try.
in addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This
Yes,
week, our friend, I think she's still our friend at least, uh, Shanda Fulbright joins us to ponder the question, women don't care about doctrine, or do they?
or do
My
they?
name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where my screen isn't showing up on the. What's
Why not?
I don't know. I see my little thumbnail. Let me cancel out of this and uh, okay, there I am.
There
And
you are.
now what do we do? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to go back to present mode here as soon as it lets me.
Okay.
And
And this is how live
yeah, this
webcasts
is how
work.
it goes wrong. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came outside shadowed. Now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. The Bible Buffet. Our regular legal disclaimer. Our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Shanda Fulbright, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast. Hereafter referred to as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements notice: the opinions in this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now let's see if I remember to press the audio button before I came in to this presentation. Our guest today, Shanda Fulbright. Everybody can hear that, right? Because I know I can. So, of course, if you hear it, it might just be because I don't have my earbuds plugged in. Did it sound regular, Don? So, can you hear me?
Well, there we go.
Yeah. So, what happened now? The postage stamp pictures, the thumbnails appeared on the left instead of the right.
I don't know because I can't see what you're seeing. Mine looks perfectly fine.
Yours look normal.
Mine looks perfectly fine. And Shonda, she wouldn't know what's changed, if anything. So,
Did
so
I pronounce your first name Chandra? I'm sorry.
Yes, my first name is Shanda. Actually, it rhymes with
Shanda.
Mm-hmm.
So I gotta go the
You're from
anything close, I'll answer to
you're from
because I'm used to
Chicago.
it.
Shanda. So, where are you from, by the way, originally?
California.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Born and raised California, moved to South Carolina a few years ago, 3 years ago.
Okay.
Good move, I think. So we have, before we get too far into this, we have two comments. One is what may be offensive, and it could be meant as a satirical. I don't know. And the other one is a kindred spirit to you. Andrew Findley says, "Nope, they don't. They also do not want men telling them anything." Now, I've heard that said, but I don't know if that's true. And the other is our friend Krista Matthias. Hi, Shanda. Really excited to hear from a like-minded lady.
Yay. Only fools walk in.
Yes, I don't really know about all of this kind of stuff, frankly, because I have very smart women in my life that are very serious about their faith and their doctrine. But about, I don't know, 2000, Gwen Shamblin was making the circuit through the churches. She was in 30,000 churches across 60 denominations, and apparently no one really ask her doctrinal positions, like the deity of Christ and Trinity and salvation by grace. And we got a call from a woman saying, "Is she Orthodox?" And I said, "I've never heard of her. We don't really look at weight loss programs, as
Not
you can
really.
tell if you meet me." It's not a high
Not that
priority.
we don't need to, we just don't, you know.
Yeah, well, I might need to. I just don't. I don't really care. It's not doctrinal. It's not. So, we went and looked at her website and we were concerned. And my initial reaction was she probably is a layperson trying to describe the deity of Christ, the Doctrine and Trinity, and doesn't really understand it well. So, made a few calls to a couple of others who had a program in their church at the time. And they said, "Oh, yeah, she's Orthodox." I said, "Okay, great." So I called to offer our services to help her rewrite her document. At which point she said, "You are a false teacher. You are," and she just kind of went off. "Jesus never claimed to be God. The Trinity's a pagan origins." And I thanked her for her time, and we hung up. And Ron and we talked about it. We created a little press release that we sent out. And Christianity Today, at the time, actually cared about these sorts of things.
At that time.
At that time, in 2000. So they picked it up and they called her to figure out if what we said was true, and she affirmed it is. And then she said this: "Women don't care about doctrine; they just want to lose weight. This will pass." And Christianity Today posted it.
Wow.
At which point we were deluged with calls and emails from women like around the country saying, "We want her out of our church today. What do we have to do?"
Well, the weird thing is this was a woman talking.
This is a woman talking. Yeah.
Girls just want to have weight loss. So there was that. And then we got a hold of her book by Thomas Nelson Publishers, by the way, in which she describes God. I didn't know if you knew this, but God is he's like a really large man, sort of at the time a heavenly Mel Gibson, if you will. Kind of a good looking guy.
Very totally good looking.
Very totally, yeah.
Yeah, and fair. He wanted Satan to have an opportunity to compete fairly against him.
That's a real turn, I hear.
Yeah, in gaining our affections. And so he made himself invisible so that Satan would have at least an even footing. But then he realized he made a mistake because more people were choosing the suitor than God himself. And so he had to resort to a boxing match in order to fight for our affections.
So you got the bad boy God and you got the nice guy God all in one.
Well, and he's not bright because he made this big mistake. And so
he admitted it, right?
as I read that to several, some women said, "That sounds like the kind of a God a woman would make up," which leaves me now conflicted.
Some women said that.
Yeah. Some women said that.
We cannot win. We cannot win. We better
cannot
not say anything. Yeah.
So it left me conflicted on this issue. But
I have no comment.
That's kind of what I did. I said, here's what I know. I have many women from around the country saying, "We want her out of here because we do care about doctrine." And then you have, of course, the things like Melissa Dougherty did a satirical look at women's Bible studies. So
How do you pronounce
Doherty.
Doherty.
Doherty. Melissa, my good pal Melissa.
Yeah.
It has been great watching her from being a person that wanted to reach JWs to what she is now. She's just great job.
So good, yeah.
And Shanda is also going to be speaking at the EMNR conference. We're going to run that into video in a moment or so. So let me toss it over to you. Maybe you can help us men who are less than astute on the whims of women. Where does this question lie?
Well, it depends upon who you ask. I mean, we live in a culture that, and I think we've seen it more recently. I follow some on Instagram and social media platforms where women are like, "Don't ever let a man tell you that a woman can't stand behind a pulpit." If you remember Harrison Butker, the kicker from I believe it was the Chiefs. For all you football fans, don't kill me if that's wrong. But just a couple months ago, he gave a speech at a graduation saying that, women, it wasn't necessarily about women in doctrine or theology or anything like that, but just basically that you're going to chase these things in academia and your career, but you're needed in the home, and that's where you're going to make the biggest difference. And eventually that's where you're going to want to be. And there were Christian women who were angry about what he had to say. And so it depends upon who you ask. I think there's a split. What I've seen is a complete divide, kind of like a polar opposites. You either have those who are like, don't tell me I can't preach. Don't tell me I can't pastor. Don't tell me that I can't stand behind a pulpit.
Basically, don't tell me. You could just fill in anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have the other end that they are more of, they want to learn. They want to be a student of the word. They look at what Paul says, when he talks about a woman should be in silent in church, and they go out and they study that and they say, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for women who honestly want to do what God wants them to do? And I've even researched those scriptures myself, because I come from a denomination. Before I moved to South Carolina, I come from a denomination that ordained women. They had 3 levels. They had an exhorter. That's the lowest level. Then an ordained minister position. And then after that, you could become bishop. It was a Pentecostal denomination. And so they would allow women to pastor churches. And so growing up in that denomination, I was confronted with not necessarily, see, we have 2 different things. Should women learn, theology and doctrine? Do they want to? But I feel like that is connected to, where does that place women within the church? And I think women look at that and say, oh, wait, if I'm not going to be able to stand behind a pulpit and preach or pastor a church, then that means that, should I even be interested in theology to begin with, or doctrine? And I don't think that they have a true conclusion of where they should land on that. And so I was confronted with this whole, where do women belong in the church? Where do we fit in the church a few years ago? And my position has changed. I don't think women should pastor churches. I don't think that is what God has called women to. Now, can they teach? Well, obviously I'm going to EMNR this weekend, and I'll be, teaching on discipleship and worldview. But there are many, many women that I've met in the apologetics realm that are students of the word, and they want to know theology, and they want to correctly, teach it and decipher it. So again, the question is, no women, like the man who commented, no women don't want to know because they don't want men telling them what to do. You're generalizing all women into that category, and that's definitely not a lot that I've seen, and it's not me.
Well, I'll tell you, my wife's not here to speak for herself, so I'll speak for her, because not that I normally do that, but I just think she would appreciate it if I did in this one particular case. She has no interest. I mean, she's an introvert. Okay, now that's okay, because there are a lot of introverted pastors. They just have a call. But she hates getting up in front of people. I mean, she hates getting up in front of people so much. She was on Valium on our wedding day. I don't know if this is legal. I don't know if we have. But
it was helpful.
It was helpful because she stayed. She didn't run away. She has no desire, nor does she ever want to ever be in a church with a woman pastor. But she's very interested in theology, especially practical theology, but even other kinds. But especially, I mean, there's just about every branch of theology is eventually practical. And so something on the doctrine of salvation that might touch on whether she's a Christian or not, that comes from the pulpit, that, I mean, she's listening. Now, everybody's different. This is the thing. What do men care about doctrine?
Right.
I mean, I've listened to men who say, well, that's just theology. That's just doctrine. I sat at a lunch table with me and 2 other men, and one of them said, the worst thing that's harming the church today is doctrine. And the funny thing about it is, he had a MacArthur Study Bible right next to him, I said, do you even know what doctrine means? I mean, look at the study notes in your study Bible. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of unfortunate stereotyping going on.
Yeah, I think part of the here's my perception as a woman, and from what I've been speaking into even in the last few years, you have two different types of women's ministries, and the most popular type of women's ministry is a fluff and stuff ministry. And I've been in them, I've been under them, and nobody wants to waste their time. When you have busy wives, moms, sometimes they're wives and moms and working full-time jobs, they don't want to go on a Wednesday night and just, have, and not that they have tea or anything. And I don't want to offend the women's ministries, because there are good ones out there. But for the most part, they have a stigma about them that they don't take their women students to the depths of knowledge that those women, one, want to go to, some of them, and two, need to go to. And then the third one is some of them don't even know that that's possible to do that. That theology is for women too. And I think that that's more, what do you mean by theology? First, it doesn't have to be studying this branch of theology, that branch of theology, et cetera, making it more complicated. And you don't just need theology if you're going to be a teacher. Like for practicality, for just living life, when you look at what discipleship is and stewarding your home and taking that seriously, it is for passing it down to your kids. It is in my opinion, when you look at the whole doctrine question and theology question and women fighting against men, it's a breakdown of its most foundational aspect.
Mhm.
And that is, like you said, do the men also care about doctrine as well?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I have a picture here I want to show everybody, but before I want to introduce it, because I was thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with Megan Basham and her recent book, Shepherds for Sale.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great book. I'm thinking of creating a new award for people like her, Don, women who are really into doctrine, theology, and the issues concerning the church. I'm thinking of calling it the Jenny Geddes Award. Have you ever heard of Jenny Geddes?
I have.
You have? Okay, well, here's a picture. Here's a famous illustration. What is Jenny Geddes doing in this picture, Don? She's throwing her stool. Back then, if you want
at the pulpit.
Right, she's throwing her stool at the pulpit. Why did she have a stool? Because they didn't have pews in a lot of churches. If you wanted to sit down, you had to bring your own stool. She was so mad at what was coming from the pulpit, she threw her stool at it. By the way, this is one of the events that sparked the English Civil War, one of the wars of religion, because there was a lot of tyranny going on, forcing certain theological views, conformity to certain theological views that people didn't believe in. And so in a way, you could look at these wars as wars of religious freedom. And Jenny Geddes, I think she deserves an award named after her. What do you think? I'm going to give that to Megan when she's on our webcast.
I like that. And Joy has, I've mentioned this before, Joy has, we have Joyisms. Ron knows this because she's been with us. We've been working together over 30 years now, and he still puts up with me. But she loves writing. She's more comfortable behind a computer working on an article than any public speaking. She just hates public speaking. However, she makes stuff up sometimes. We call them Joyisms. And as we were writing on a topic about some issue in the church, she said, just because you heard it from the pulpit doesn't mean it isn't stupid. We need to be discerning, even by our pastors, what they say. Not that they aren't men of God, and we need to listen to what they have to say, but part of our task is to actually be Bereans. They said to Paul, got it. We need some time to think about that. Go off in the corner, have a coffee, tea, whatever. We'll be back with you in a few minutes, and they checked it out. That is rarely done in churches by either men or women, unfortunately.
By the way, Joy is a well-known woman who cares about doctrine.
She is.
well known for that, too.
Yeah, and she got us involved with this ministry to begin with, sort of, well, I think God's hand was in that, but otherwise I'd say it's a fluke. Because an interesting thing happened on the way to my spiritual growth. I had become a believer. She had recommitted her life to Christ. A little while later, she, because we were avid bowlers, we bowled 4 times a week usually, on 2 leagues plus practices. And she joined a women's scratch league. serious bowlers. They showed up with 2 bowling balls for whatever conditions. I mean, they call themselves the Hot Tomatoes. And there were Jehovah's Witnesses on this
I
league
didn't
at
know
the
that.
time. Yeah, and she came home. She said, "These are really some wonderful women, but they're Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm not sure what they believe. Can you help me figure it out?" So we went to my pastor. Loved our pastor, good Bible teacher. He didn't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mm.
He gave us a little tract, which might have been helpful, but all it did was had a lot of Bible verses and didn't tell us why they were important. So we ended up learning our doctrine because Joy cared about reaching somebody for the faith. And as a result of that, when I'm talking with pastors who are struggling to figure out ways to get their people to evangelize, I say, okay, number one, you need to teach them your doctrinal statement because most everyone simply signs it as part of the membership process. They don't understand it. Number one. Number two, once they learn a doctrinal statement and you continue teaching, pray that God brings someone into their life that they cannot imagine not being in heaven. Because when they have that passion, there's no amount of study they won't do. There's no amount of Bible research they won't do. There's no amount of understanding they won't do, money they won't pay to try to figure out how to reach that person. Now, women are really good at that because women are all about relationships.
Right. Exactly. And George Barna's research, he's a worldview researcher out of Arizona Christian University. And he says there are about 65% of Americans that claim to be Christians. Well, within that claim, you have progressive Christians, you have Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. They all say that they're Christians, but their doctrines, how we know that they are not part of that Christian religion is because of the doctrines. But because we don't know how to identify them, and by we, I mean the Christian people who actually are of the Christian religion, they
Right.
don't know their own doctrine. We haven't gotten to understand the fundamentals of our faith. So when you go and you look at a mission statement or what the church believes, people aren't going to know sometimes that what is and what is not part of basic Christian doctrine. And how you know if somebody has a biblical worldview or not is based upon those doctrines, what they believe about Jesus, what they believe about, faith and how is salvation earned or is it not? Is it by grace? Well, we haven't done a very good job as the church because only 4% of those who claim to be Christians have a biblical worldview. Well, when you have women who are a huge contributor to their homes. Now, again, let's not even talk about what they do within ministry because it shouldn't be a motivator of, well, if I can't go behind a pulpit or if I can't have this certain position within the church, I'm not even going to, be interested in theology because again, those two are not the same. That's not what we're talking about. Every Christian should understand their theology, their doctrines. But just the influence that women have in their own sphere of influence is a reason to know what you believe and why. And that's the thing. It's knowing what you believe and why you believe it. But if you don't know why you're even a Christian, then I don't think you really know what you believe because the why and the what go together. And a lot of times people say, well, apologetics is the defense. It's the why. I agree with you. But if you don't even know what you believe, the doctrines of Christianity, how could you even say, and this is why I believe it? You're not even ready for why. You don't even know what.
Yeah, I take that one step farther on what apologetics is. I agree with you that it's the why. Most think it's the why for evangelism, but it's also the why for discipleship.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
It
Yes.
is a defense of why I believe what I believe. It's an explanation of what I believe, why I believe it, and a defense in that direction. So, and you and I have talked about this before. Discipleship is, well, Dr. Donald Williams puts it best, I think. It is today's version of that would be called apprenticeship. We see that in the trades where you
Yeah.
apprentice to a company or a person for 4 years. You follow them around, you do what they do, you watch it, you observe, you experiment with it, you do it for yourself as you're learning all the technical aspects of it until eventually you graduate as a full-fledged electrician or carpenter or whatever. that really is how we should be doing things in the church.
Yeah.
Instead, we give them a booklet. We spend an hour a week on this booklet, and then after 9 weeks, you go, okay, now you're a disciple, go to somebody else. That isn't how it works.
No, not at all. And the thing that made me really become interested in, because I was raised in church and I grew up understanding that the Bible was our source of truth, and it is the foundation in which we, place our faith and we grow thereby. But what made me realize, because I came from the Pentecostal denomination, which was more feelings based, it was, God showed up today or the Spirit moved today because people were down at the altar crying. That was the terminology. So in my mind, growing up in church, we connected a lot of emotion to the existence of God and God moving and God showing up and God working in our lives. But I heard, Matthew 28, not Matthew 28:19, but Matthew, I believe it's 22:37, where Jesus talks about loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And one day I was listening to Frank Turek, and he emphasized that we're leaving the mind out of our discipleship, out of Christianity. And it was like the puzzle piece for me that was missing in my upbringing within the church. And I thought, this is true. Christianity is an intellectual faith. And when you look at women's ministries and what they mostly push and emphasize, it is more of the feeling, the emotion, rather than the student learning and the mindfulness of, or being mindful of just being a student of the word. So I think that's also something that women's ministries have to get away from. But you have to ask yourself, only disciples can make disciples. Because even women's ministry, you can call it women's ministry, getting together on a Wednesday night. It should be a discipleship program, no matter what it's called, no matter what gender it is. But they're really students of the word. And I don't think the church does a very good job of communicating the fact that that's what a disciple is. It's a student.
I agree with you.
Earlier you had a term for what you call many women's ministries. What was it? What, fluff and stuff?
Yeah. I call it fluff and stuff.
What is the stuff part? Like, I think I know what the fluff is.
The stuff, and I try to be careful, because again, I don't want to put this like be stereotypical, but it's when you get together and you make your crafts, or you had these. I've been to women's conferences where they'll theme it, make a theme of women's tea, and there's teacups all around, and it's a typical message that's fluff, the fluffy message,
Yeah.
God, there's only one you, and God wants you to fulfill your purpose. Not that doesn't have meaning or a place, but I think it doesn't have depth. If that's where you stop, where's the depth in that? What does that mean for you? And then the fluff part is that it's cringy, the cringy relational aspect of it, where we all go around and, it's the parts where you're making the crafts, or you're talking, you have these little things on your table where you pick something off, and everybody has to answer a question. I just feel like you treat women, you almost insult their intelligence by not challenging them with the things that they actually face as Christians in this culture, where if you're raising kids and they are going to a public school, how do I protect my child? How do I teach them how to handle an environment like that? That is real world issues. And what they've done is you compartmentalize, and you teach Christians to compartmentalize. Here's what I do on a Sunday, or at a women's conference, or maybe at this event. And then I go home and I live the rest of my life, and I don't know how to integrate the Bible, what God has to say, what I should be learning on that Wednesday night or within these programs at church, to integrate that into my life so I can live that. And I think that's the disconnect, not just with women's ministries, to be fair. It's the disconnect of the church in general.
Right.
It's the church, right?
As you're talking, I'm thinking, I'll ask Don this question. it seems to me that women's ministries have been around for quite a while. I mean, I think they just used to be called women's Bible studies.
Yeah.
They were really big in the 70s because a lot of women had not yet gone into the workforce, and
Right.
I think you saw that kind of ebbing away a little bit as you got into the 80s and 90s. But Don, doesn't it seem to you that men's ministries is a rather recent phenomenon to have like a separate thing called men's ministries?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that until recently, the whole purpose, what we did with men is we were just happy if they came to church. And sometimes they had their own fellowships, but a whole ministry where now it's become like a thing where you got to I look at churches that have a men's pastor, and he's always like an athlete or a coach type figure. He's always going to get his, this seems to me to be the trend that I'm seeing. And it seems like they're kind of taking a page out of women's ministries and applying it to what they're calling men's ministries. So instead of fluff and stuff, I would say maybe you've got tough and stuff or something like that. That's what occurred to me as Sandra was talking, or Sanda. Sandra was talking.
You're fine. Don't even.
So I want to weigh on this just briefly, and then we have some other comments we'll pick up as soon as we come back. But it may be that since the church has really moved to how do we socialize people into the faith, we've seen this kind of phenomena grow. That it becomes more about how do we just engage you to be in the building with each other. Stands any actual teaching, because that might cause them to run away. Now, having said that, there's always the problem of which doctrine do we want to learn or not learn, and one of our sponsors kind of has addressed that.
Yeah, they have a question, which is, are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take this whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check into the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And they're always open, even if COVID should happen to reemerge, thanks to Bible Buffet carryout. Their regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, Pelagian pie, and Socinian salad. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. So,
the Bible Buffet.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick things. Krista, I'm going to pick one of hers out here. I think that some folks also read some of Paul's writings about women needing to be silent in the church, or if they can't understand teachings, then they should have their husbands explain it to them. Now, not all the passages that talk about women in church are like this, but I agree with this one. And just as an example, I was preaching, I was intern pastoring at a church, and Joy and her friend Penny were in the front row, and I was dealing with this passage and explaining that in the Corinthian church, among all the problems they had, one of them was, because you used to have the women on one side of the room and men on the other side of the room, is the preacher would say something, and then the wife would look across and say, "Harry, what did he say?" and just as I said that, both of them looked up and said, "What?" And so there was a live example of just what I was talking about, because Paul says, ask your husband at home. In other words, don't be disruptive in the church.
Right.
So that's one issue. And I thought L Sparks says, I ask a lot of questions and do discipleship. I find women will ask a lot of questions because they don't want to be deceived. But other women get really defensive when they don't have an answer. I think that's true of pretty much everybody if you don't have an answer.
Sure.
So you've got quite a fan club here weighing in on this stuff. Sean Michelle, so true, fluff and stuff. Even going to women of faith many years ago was so emotionally driven that, but with no lasting substance. Joy doesn't really go to women's conferences, largely for that, because
Yeah.
serious-minded.
Yeah, I've been to, not too long ago, I went to a very well-known women's writers conference, and I won't go back. And that weekend, I was actually speaking to 3 different publishers. And by the end of the weekend with the 3rd publisher, I told her, I don't care if you publish anything that I write. I don't like the way that this conference is self-promotion, all about, it's selling women, like I said, a message, and the message runs along the same vein all the time. Like, you're worth it. You have this dream that God wants to fulfill in your life. And like I said, it for some women, a lot of women, they'll run with that, like, yay, this is great. But for other women, I see there's a lot that want depth. And Paul told Timothy, or actually I think it's in Titus too, where the older are to teach the younger, that there are a lot of young women out there that need mentors, that want the older women to teach them. And I find that we don't have a lot of qualified disciple makers because they haven't, for one, they don't really know. When I talk about studying the Bible on my podcast, or in a live teaching somewhere, nobody knows how to do that. A lot of women and men too, but we're talking about women. A lot of women don't know how to open up a book of the Bible and study it and exegetically,
Right.
and to look through, how do I study this? How do I look at historical context to understand how to apply it? Everybody's been taught to apply first. So what does this mean to me? What is this, how do I, they're isolating verses and clinging to those things. So I think that people, for the most part, they move around the edges of scripture, but they haven't been taught how to dive into it. And that's the issue.
We have unfortunately a church culture. It's not necessarily particular churches, but a church culture that kind of trains not just women but men as well. A Christian ease, a sort of Christian. You have things like my book of Bible promises.
Yes.
Most of which are out of context. I hate those things.
Yes. Yep.
So I find myself usually having to unknot a lot of that sort of thing. That's one. Second thing is, even though our culture can't even determine what a woman is any longer, I have discovered over the years, probably I knew this really young, that men and women are just different. I don't mean just physically. I just mean
in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, in many ways. I think
By design.
women tend to, in fact, when I do marriage counseling, I tell the young husband-to-be, here's something you need to understand. Women have relationships with everything, right? It's not just a relationship with you. It's a relationship with her house. It's a relationship with her bedroom. It's a relationship with her car. It's a relationship with her it's a relationship with everything.
Right.
And if you don't get that, you're not really understanding what's going on with her. My son, when he was married, called me one day after several months, and he said, Dad, I have this picture that I want to put in our living room, and she just won't let me do it. What do I have to do? And I said, okay, you know this. You just have forgotten it. Your wife is having a relationship with her living room. Your picture doesn't fit into that relationship. Just put it up in the basement. Right?
Yes.
So that's one aspect. When I have someone contact me and say, to deal with the problem of evil, I'm thinking of philosophical discussion, because that's how men tend to operate. It's a task we're going to attack. We're going to come to a conclusion. We're going to have the answer. And if a woman asks me that, usually it means they have a friend whose son is dying or something. And they're trying to grapple with this emotional situation in this relationship.
Mhm.
Am I wrong in that?
Oh no. When I moved from California, we raised our boys in the house that we moved from. And I told my husband, I told someone 2 days ago on Sunday night, we were all at the zoo, and I said, I have to stop thinking about this house as though it's a person, that I
Really?
raised my kids there. And then it's like I'm attached to it because of all the memories that are surrounded, like
Wow.
so yeah, when you're saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do it to my car. When it comes time to sell the car, it's like, but we put all their car seats in the car, and we raised the boy. We all drove around together in this car. Yes, because it's that emotional. When you think women are very much more emotionally attached, we know how to move those emotions. And I think that that's a good thing. I think that that can be used, like you said, when you look at discipleship, which I'm talking about this weekend. I'm going to be talking about Stalin, Pol Pot, Hitler, Mao Zedong. What do they all have in common? They weren't just Marxists and communists. They were disciple makers. They targeted the young.
Right.
But what makes their discipleship different than Jesus's? Because Jesus obviously had the best model. It was the relationship. With discipleship without a relationship is dictatorship. It's
Right.
not. It's indoctrination. But women know how to let me disciple you and create that relationship. That's why they say the future of apologetics is women, because it used to be this intellectual thing that was untouchable. Like Christians weren't encouraged to be apologists. Apologists were those smart people on stages that debated atheists because they were the smart people. But now you have so many more women getting into apologetics and knowing and understanding what their theology is and how to defend it. But they're creating those relationships, and they're more relational, to where now other people are saying, wait a second, that's how it should be done. Because like you said, Dawn, apologetics is such a great tool for discipleship. And women can disciple very well because they know how to do relationships well.
And we're starting to see a huge, really huge, I think it's huge, Don. What do you think? Trend of women creating apologetics ministries. Mama Bear apologetics.
I think so. In fact, we have what we have been referring to in recent years as a growing apologetics industrial complex, which is both good and bad. You have more people that are being trained. One of my concerns, which I voiced to several, is we have people that are getting themselves trained to train others in certain settings, but they're not discipling and they're not evangelizing.
Yeah.
So, there's a group of us, and it's kind of a small-ish group, that are apologists by interest and calling and whatever, that do weird things like go to the Parliament of World Religions, and that is a place to use apologetics, or the pagan and Wiccan conferences and those sorts of things.
Right.
So now you've mentioned a couple of times you're teaching this weekend. Let's give folks a view of what that is.
Oops.
And that is coming up in a few days.
Yes.
Starts on Friday. So
are you driving down or flying?
I am driving down. Joy and I are driving down. We're leaving tomorrow, and Shanda is also driving. So we'll be getting there Thursday. Yeah. So, oops. Let's go
What
here.
happened? I don't like to see myself that close.
I don't like to see you that close either.
I know.
Galahad X says this. How do you interpret Isaiah 3:12? As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the way of thy paths.
I think somebody's not going to like my answer.
I'm sorry?
I think someone might not like my answer, but
Well, what does the passage say? Whether
it
they
says
like it
right
or not.
there. It
You have
doesn't
to read it
sound
within context. You can't just
right.
pull one verse out.
It doesn't sound. Yeah, it's children are their oppressors. Well, you see this a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
at this time in Israel's history, or Judah mainly, they're very affluent. And you see the prophets talking about how the young women walked around very arrogantly in their makeup and jewelry and hairstyles. It sounds, it's like, listening to, you know, Frank Zappa's daughter singing Valley Girl, I mean, it was very like they lived in another world. It was affluent, it was self indulgent, it was narcissistic, it was a narcissistic culture. Uh, and here, I think in that day, of course, women ruling wasn't always a sign of weakness. I mean, there were some pretty strong female leaders,
Right.
but I think when you have children as their oppressors and women rule over them, sounds kind of like this is not presented in a positive way. Like the men aren't doing their job.
Right.
That's really
Right.
what's going on here.
Right. And we kind of see that we're going to get slightly social and political for a moment. We have that going on in our nation right now, where uh, those with lack experience, say college students or even younger, are demanding that those with experience yield to their demands.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a dangerous thing. If you have no life experience, how can you know how to run a company or a country? It's
You
just
can't.
because
Yeah.
you feel a certain way, you
Mhm.
can't do that. So,
Right.
Isaiah was dealing with the same kind of a thing, as Ron pointed out. You have a culture that is pretty well to do, where the young are ruling over the old by demand. So,
Yeah, and I would caution people to be careful when you take a scripture out like that, because you can do it for both sides of the argument. You have
right,
people who do it like, well, look at what Paul's calling out these women in the epistles and in saying that they were in leadership. Then you have Deborah who was in leadership, so that means that women can be in leadership within the church. And then you have people on the other side who pull out something like that from Isaiah 3:12 or other verses and say no, because look at this. What we have to do is look at it within the full context, look at it within the Old Testament and the New, and say, what does it mean for the church today? So I just say that, isolation of one verse without looking at the complete passage and historical
right,
context will lead you a lot of the times to a false conclusion.
right. Even now, because I get this, and Ron knows, I get calls or emails like every day, very often about I don't understand this passage, sort of thing.
Mhm.
As we're kind of discipling people out of cults and other religious groups and things like that, and I have to start with this: what is the context? And I explain all that to them, and then I don't answer them until I open it up, even though I know the passage, to make sure that I'm walking through the passage with them. And I have one young guy. He's was involved with the Rancha book for quite a long time. Uh, Once he learned about context, it just revolutionized his Bible reading,
Right.
because things that he thought it was saying, it usually is not saying.
Yeah.
So in this case, though, I mean, I think when people read that verse, they might have a lot of questions like, should women even run women's ministries? Should men run them? Uh, and that's a good question. I mean, I think we've had a situation for a long time where the men of the church, the pastors, the elders, and so on, the deacons, have just kind of let women's ministries do their own thing and not provided any kind of assist. I mean, they haven't. Maybe they've been afraid to. Maybe they didn't want to usurp a role of some kind. In some cases, I know men. There have been in some situations I've seen where the pastor was a little bit too overbearing in how much he kind of micromanaged women's ministries. And in other cases, I've seen complete hands-off approaches
Mhm.
where then you run into these things like Way Down Workshop and other weird ideas getting into women's ministries because the spiritual leadership of the church isn't paying any attention. So
Yeah. And I think that that's a pastor issue, because that's, that's his responsibility, his job to oversee the entire church. And along the same, in relation to that, I don't know that churches necessarily have, the one that I came from, I was in it for 17 years. We didn't really have a system in place where we even saw who was capable of teaching.
mm,
The pool for teachers at the church I came from was so small
mm,
that the same people were teaching, and there was no, can you teach? What do you like? I hate to say test, but something that showed that they were equipped to teach. And I always say, coming from the public school system, I was trained to assess my students and to see what they knew, what they did not know, and where they were starting at grade level. So I knew where to take them. I knew how to teach them. George Barna has done that with his American Worldview Inventory. He
mm,
laid it out for the church and said, this is what the majority of Christians believe. These are the doctrines that they deny, not just don't believe in. They're denying these doctrines. They're adopting some from other worldviews. And it tells the pastor, this is what we should be teaching. This is a great starting point. I mean, if only 4% of Americans who claim to be Christian have a biblical worldview, then you can pretty much guarantee that many in your congregation are falling into the category of not having a biblical worldview. So the only way to disciple them is to make sure that your programs that you have in place are ran by people who have a biblical worldview. There should be some sort of test or standard that your teachers are meeting to know if they're equipped. Because how many times have we seen, even in Christian education, I didn't just send my kid to a school that said that they were a Christian school. I had a list of questions to make sure, how do you hire your teachers that are going to be with my kid for 7.5 hours out of the day? Because just because they say they're a Christian, it's good, but it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. I want them to think like a Christian. That's what a biblical worldview is you don't just say, I read the Bible or I'm a Christian. You say, this is how I integrate the word of God into my life, whether it be through politics, whether it be through, social ideas, or whatever it may be, family, traditional marriage. What do we think about those things because of what God has said about those things?
Right. Right. Now, someone, Sean Michelle, says, hands-off approaches by elders are very detrimental to women's ministries. This is kind of along the lines of what you were just describing.
Mhm.
Asking the right questions, especially of those who are going to be leading. And
yeah,
and this is true of quote men's ministries as well. I in
right,
my
right.
opinion, right? Is who's selecting the material. The church has gotten into, and this is kind of a Willow Creek Saddleback issue of not actual Bible study and teaching in small groups, but as kind of a shared ignorance time to get together.
Yeah.
Let's
Right.
share. Let's pool our ignorance here and see.
Yeah, yeah. You're not
Yeah,
actually doing a Bible study or teaching how to do a Bible study, or taking a book that you might want to use and say, okay, is it accurate? Is it biblical? Is it whatever? Is someone vetting the material before it gets in the hands of the congregation? It doesn't have to be the pastor. He can't do everything. But if you had one or two people that are apologetically oriented who could vet the material before it gets in the hands of the
Mhm.
people, that would go a long way to slow down some of the false teaching that they're imbibing upon. And
Yeah.
when you
Mhm.
add to that today that pastors don't even know, you have them, using the Enneagram or, channeling Jesus through Jesus calling or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
Why isn't someone catching that?
Exactly. And even with some of the Bible studies that are written by, I mean, how many Jen Hatmaker, books were in women's ministries before people started calling out Jen Hatmaker? It's like, I know women who in my town in California who went because they rented out movie theaters to watch her on the big screen, give her, conference. It's like, and they were going to church. Somebody has to be vetting those things. But if you don't have the person at the top who has a biblical worldview and who knows what to look for, that's why I think one of the commenters just said that people who don't have any accountability is detrimental for women's ministries. It's so true. It's not just for women's ministries. Look at the children's ministries that have had curriculum. I think Orange Theory and different things or not theory. I think that's a workout, but Orange curriculum or something like that has come out in the last couple of years with teachings that people have flagged and said, you've got to rethink this before you put it into your children's ministries. So, and not trying to be sexist, but a lot of children's ministries are ran more by women as well. So if they're connected to a women's ministry that doesn't have the accountability or even the ability to vet the Bible studies and things, then yeah, it's going to trickle down into the children's department, which everything is trickled down from leadership to be, if you're looking at it.
It really is. And now I don't get too involved in the discussions between women leadership, not leadership, because we're a mission to cults and non-Christian religions. So that isn't something I have to deal with quite to the same degree as, say, a pastor. Someone like Ron, he has to deal with that in his church context. So he's going to have more definite ideas on that. Not that mine would be different. I just don't have to voice them. Right?
Never have to talk about them.
Yeah. But what I do have is an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity, to work with very smart men and women passionate about the faith. And we are moving in the same direction. And what I often have to tell even church leadership is, you may sort of exclude women from leadership in theory, but in reality, you have a husband and you have other women that you listen to, and they're going to tell you what you need to know in your considerations for the church.
Right.
Right. Listen to them.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of women have great insights and input. I mean, I'm not trying to dog on women. I am a woman within leadership within the church. So I just think that, that's the topic of today, right? Women in theology. So that's more why I'm streamlining what I'm saying. But there are women out there who have lots of wisdom to give, and they have insights. They're at the age to where they have more time and they are digging deeper, and they can encourage the younger women and show them how to do that. It's just, I don't know that we are the majority at the moment. And hopefully that will take a turn, because especially with, like Ron said, more women getting into apologetics. When you're into apologetics, you are constantly studying and looking at the culture, and you're not separating what you believe about, God and the Bible from the world that you live in. And that's really how you teach others and how you disciple them.
And we're seeing in these new apologetics ministries operated by women, we're seeing mentoring going on between the women, which is a very biblical thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Older women are taking younger women under their wing, and they might just be older in the faith sometimes, but they're showing them how it's done in apologetics.
Yeah, my church is starting a mentorship program for women. So they sent us an email saying who wants to do it, who wants to be part of the mentorship. They got so many women who wanted to be mentored and who want to be mentors, but they didn't leave it there. They're giving a training in September and October on, training for the mentors, even training for the mentees, assigned books for us to read, coming together a few Monday nights. I think it's like maybe 3 or 4 Monday nights to make sure we're all on the same page. And then the mentorship starts in January, and it's a 1-year commitment. And so my church specifically talks about being discipleship oriented. And I love that. And so since we moved to South Carolina, we've been a part of this, and you can just see the intentionality, because again, and we talked about this the last time I was on, the first part of a discipleship program is intentionality. You are intentional about who you disciple and what you're discipling them to. And you can only disciple somebody from the worldview in which you have. You will not disciple them to something different.
Right.
So people have to understand what discipleship is. And I think, Don, that's part of the problem with the church, is that we've heard disciple so many times. We don't really know what it is, and we think it's just a Christian term, and it's not.
It's not at all.
Not at all.
Sean, posted this a little while ago. I didn't put it up yet, but I thought, in light of what you just said, this is important. We just started an inductive Bible study for women in our 25-year history. 36 women signed up. It
Wow.
just shows the hunger for a deeper understanding of Scripture in its context and learning to let it speak for itself.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something. We have I haven't seen her in quite a few years, but a young woman, single young woman, who was very, very, very involved in our ministry, smart, sharp, passionate about the faith. And she said she struggled with churches because they kind of want to put you into a women's knitting course or something like that. They don't take a women who want to think deeply about the faith seriously in too many churches. And that really bothered her. It made it difficult for her to go to church.
Yeah.
So, and on top of that, she was single, and she said there's another kind of an issue that if you're single and of marriageable age and you're not married, then people are kind of put off because maybe you're trying to get someone's husband or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these other issues going on unrelated to this, but I found that fascinating. So
Yeah. I agree. I think there's a stigma around singleness for sure, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
But as far as the women and where their place within the church, I think that you have to relate that to feminism as well. And I was watching a group of ladies together last week, and they were talking about how much more difficult it is for women in the culture that we live in. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I have read Toxic Masculine, or The War on Toxic Masculinity by Nancy Pearcey. And you look at the statistics and the women that are involved in the universities and graduating with degrees and how many men are actually going to universities these days. And I have 3 boys. I have a wonderful husband. I'm a champion of men, good, godly men, because of where God has placed me as a mom. You're not going to convince me that it's more difficult for women. I do believe that women, like I said, have great insights and things like that. But I think that sometimes we've allowed feminism, that feminist ideology and mentality into the church. And so I follow a couple ladies, not because I want to, because it does great against my very soul to sometimes read what they write. But, when they get angry about how women can't stand behind the pulpit, I think that is hurting the church. Somebody needs to have a conversation with women like that, because that is more of dividing the church and causing a division. So we have to be careful, even, with those things.
There's either a particular, I don't know, brand or strand of feminism, or a particular percentage of feminists who seem to think men have no problems. It's like we're on top of the world, especially if you're white. Right. You're white. You are the most privileged person on earth. You've got no stresses to speak of. You never have to worry about anything. I've had it said flat out directly to my face, "Oh, you poor white male, what are you complaining about?" It's like if I express any kind of problem. Of course, I was working in a liberal seminary at the time.
Well, and we clearly have culture encroaching on the church. The church works so hard to be a comfortable place for unbelievers to come into, looking more like the culture than like a church. The result has been that the church has been culturized now, which makes this a lot more difficult. So when you're talking about toxic masculinity, for example, what does that mean? Here's one of the things that I think we need to look at, because it goes back to Scripture. Are we teaching godly men how to be godly men according to the scriptural mandates? Right. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. What is that? That's sacrificial, and gave himself for it.
Right.
It means our task is to serve our wives to the best of our ability, to protect them and provide for them. That's our job.
Yeah.
Wives, husbands, love your wives. Wives, reference your husbands, because sometimes it's difficult to reverence a husband who's not that bright, maybe. Right? Fortunately, I have a wife who puts up with my unbrightness at times. And we make, we'll be married 54 years this year.
Wow.
but it's a task. You have to work at it every day.
So like
anyway,
toxic masculinity is simply all the bad things that men do, and internalized toxic masculinity is what happens when women do the same things. So, it's women do. The thing is, women do them, bullying. Gee, has there ever been a woman accused of bullying?
No, not that I know of.
Yeah, some are.
No woman. The female pastor of Riverside Church in New York was fired for it. She wasn't only fired for bullying, but she was fired for sexual harassment. She bought sex toys for one of her female underlings, and yeah, it's I've worked with women who, well, no, I should say I've worked in institutions where the department down the hall that had a woman in charge, not all of them, but some of them, had a revolving door. Nobody could work under this person. Kind of like a certain politician you've heard about recently. Pretty much the same exact scenario. And almost all of her employees were women who couldn't work with her. She was, I won't go into it, but it was, it happens. But then when many feminists see this, they say, well, that's just internalized toxic masculinity. See, they've basically learned how to be toxic males inside. So,
yeah. Well, I think you're right about the white male Christian is the top of the oppressor chain within this whole. So you're not going to win. You're never going to win. Everything that you do pegged as toxic.
White male, straight, cisgendered.
Okay. Right. Now let's wind back here because we're actually over time here, and I don't want to get too far afield on women and doctrine. I think we can safely say that there are women who value doctrine and context, and absolutely, and there are many men who don't. So I don't know that it's a gender thing. I think it's something else that's going on, and unfortunately, many in the Christian culture are kind of feeding into this spiritual and intellectual laziness. And we're starting, by the way, for those who are at all interested, tonight at 8:00 Central Time. Dr. Donald Williams is starting. We're going to go through his book, 95 Theses for a New Reformation, and I think that's very important. I've done it 3 times now, and I think it's a very important book. And churches, I think, in my opinion, pastors and elders definitely should go through that book together. So, Shanda, I'm going to see you probably when you arrive sometime Thursday.
Yes.
Ron, would you care to take us on a waltz out of here?
Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Kneel Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Jolie Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happen.
No. Well, thank you for coming, everybody.
And everyone out there in Webland, we will see you next week.